I learned three things in a single afternoon. One, never underestimate how fast a person in a nice haircut will jump to assume power. Two, that community standards is often just a polite way to say control. And three, if someone shows up at your front door waving a clipboard like a badge, don't assume they're right, assume they're dramatic. So picture this me city kid through and through, spent years listening to traffic lights and subway screeches for lullabies, and then one day I had enough gas money and patience to buy myself a ridiculous dream, a weathered cabin tucked down in a valley so quiet the crickets sounded like violins. Not a gated subdivision, not a weekend development, just pure land the way my grandfather kept it. A crooked fence, an old shed grass that grew where it pleased. I signed the papers, I held the deed, and I told myself I was done with other people's rules. That was the plan: fix the place up, learn to coax coffee from a French press, and maybe have a couple buddies over to roast bad decisions and marshmallows on weekends. Peace, simple as that. For 2 whole glorious weeks, the valley treated me like a secret mornings, spilling gold across the trees. Late afternoons where the only argument I had was whether to sit on the porch or lie in the grass. I learned the sound of the wind when it moved through the pines. I learned the rhythm of my own breathing when there was no city pulse to match. I was on the ladder one sunny afternoon, roof patch in hand, when a white SUV that could have been painted by a billboard rolled down my dusty drive like it belonged to someone important. The vehicle sparkled at me like the valley owed it an apology for being rustic. Out stepped a woman whose haircut was so sharp you could set a clock to it. Lips powdered nails, immaculate, the kind of neatness that screams control. She planted her feet, placed her hands on her hips, and announced herself like a foghorn. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" She didn't ask. She told. I was halfway down the ladder, son. In my eyes, roof in my head, and I said, fixing my roof. She looked at the ladder like it had personally offended her childhood. "This is unapproved construction," she said, like the phrase had been engraved on her soul. "All modifications must be submitted to the Valley View Estates Homeowners Association." There are few things more surreal than hearing the words Homeowners Association out here, where the most organized thing is a raccoon with a map. I blinked. I smiled politely. You know, the city-trained thing, and I tried reason. "Ma'am, I own this place. I bought this valley." She didn't even pause for the sentence to land. "Did you submit Form 37B?" she asked, forehead creasing like a judge double-checking a subpoena. I could hear my own jaw drop, which is embarrassing at any age. She began reading me the bylaws like she was reciting scripture. The height of fences, the approved color palette for wood stain, the permitted number of rocking chairs on porches, rules I had never seen, and rules that, to my knowledge, had never been needed here. She gestured toward my wildflower meadow as though it were a public threat. "You'll be cited," she said, as if she were sentencing me to mow my soul. She declared fines, she threatened lien filings. She used big words with the confidence of someone who'd never had to learn how to tighten a loose shingle. The clipboard moved, notes being made, righteous fury being tallied in pencil. I didn't get angry at first. I got amused, the kind of detached amusement you get when watching a sitcom actor show up in the wrong town. But then her tone turned teeth-gnashingly serious, and the amusement curdled. "I'm the president of the Valley View Estates HOA," she said, as if that title would summon neighbors out of the trees. "You are in violation of 17 bylaws, 17 a very specific number that in its own way was artfully unnecessary." So I walked inside, grabbed the folder that people who buy land obsessively keep, the folder of deeds and survey maps and stamps that smell faintly of old victory, and I unfolded the largest map I had. There it was, all in bold and boring serif print, the entire valley contour lines, my name across the title block, the legal description that put me square in the center of it all. I held it up like a flag. "Ma'am," I said, calm but not polite anymore, "this valley is mine. There's no HOA because there are no other homes." You could see her entire internal economy recalibrate. The clipboard slipped from her fingers. Her face did that theatrical thing where it's trying to recall which script it's supposed to follow. For a beat, her eyes moved from the map to me, to the empty stretch of land and back again, like she was auditioning for surprise. Then she hissed something about the website, and the bylaws, and the community center, fragments of a story that made less sense the more they were said. I watched as she reached for her phone, the color leaving her face like someone turned off the lights. She had been playing sheriff out here in a place that didn't exist for her. That's the twist, and I promise it's the good kind. She hadn't come to enforce rules. She had come because somewhere between the internet and a dream, she had bought into a con. A developer, somebody slick with a nice suit and a website and a brochure, had sold people plots in a Phantom Valley View estates, complete with a fake HOA, a logo, and a carefully curated sense of community. She had driven 2 towns over every other weekend, convinced she was protecting a neighborhood that was, for all practical purposes, imaginary. She was not bullying me, she was the bullied. The developer had created a kingdom for people who wanted to be part of something and then charged admission to an empty field. The defiance drained out of her and left something very small where smugness had been. She muttered apologies that were more about salvaging face than expressing regret. She grabbed her clipboard, ran back to her SUV, and sped off a little cloud of dust and humiliation in her wake. I stood there, map in hand, watching tire tracks fade into the grass, feeling a complicated tangle of things, pity, vindication, and something that felt like sorrow for a stranger who'd been sold a fairy tale. That night I sat on my porch and thought about how easy it is to confuse authority with truth. Someone with a title, a website, a neat haircut will often be believed because people want the world to be ordered to make sense. We mistake organization for legitimacy sometimes, and every so often that mistake costs someone dignity or money, or they're quiet. I made myself a promise in the dark, the kind of promise you whisper because you want it to be true. I wouldn't let a fake rule or a fake community run me out of my home. The next day I did the sort of thing small town folks love to hate. I went a little theatrical. I painted a hand-lettered sign and hammered it into the drive. Welcome to the valley population, one no HOA ever. It wasn't mean. It was a wink. It felt like reclaiming space from strangers and phone calls and PDFs that pretend to be law. A week later, a neighbor, real neighbor, someone with a mailbox and a real name who lived on the nearest ridge, came up and told me he'd seen others in town getting the same calls, the same glossy brochures. He said he'd forwarded a message to the sheriff's office. Turns out the developer had been pulling the same trick on several folks selling fantasies and then letting them stew in the worry of imaginary bylaws. I don't know how all of it ended. The sheriff made a polite noise about investigations, and the internet did what the internet does, which is to love a scandal and then move on. But the immediate justice felt sweet and quiet. The woman with the clipboard never came back, the SUV didn't reappear, and the meadow kept blooming. Justice in my version of the story wasn't a headline. It was the sound of my hammer on the porch, the map folded into a drawer, and the peace of the place finally settling around me like a blanket. If there's a lesson here, it's not the moralizing kind you get in sermons. It's smaller, sharper. People who crave control will invent it when it's absent, and sometimes they'll hurt the wrong people while chasing a feeling of belonging. Also, paperwork and titles can be comforting masks for incompetence or fraud. Don't let the neatness of a person or a website convince you they've earned authority. And finally, community, real community, is built by showing up, by fixing a leaking roof, by sharing coffee on a porch at dawn, not by buying into someone's glossy brochure. That realization hit me like cold water, and I won't lie, it stung. But it also felt honest. The ending was pleasing in the way endings that earn themselves tend to be not loud, not dramatic on a courthouse scale, but satisfying. The phantom HOA evaporated as its own paper trail unraveled. The woman with the clipboard's fury evaporated into a lesson, and my field of wildflowers kept being unapologetically wild. Someone once told me that karma prefers to look tidy, like a well-made bed, but the version I saw was messier and kinder. People who tried to take something that wasn't theirs found doors closed, and the ones who kept to their own work found the quiet they'd been promised. So here's the thing I want to leave you with, and I mean this as an honest question because I've argued it with friends over beers. Since when does enforcing the rules become worse than no rules at all? If a group of strangers gathers behind a logo and a binder and decides what your life should look like, who is protecting whom? And if someone shows up with a clipboard and righteous certainty, Do you assume they're the authority or do you ask for the map? If you've ever had a neighbor with more opinions than sense, a landlord with more rules than compassion, or a moment where a person in a suit tried to sell you belonging, I want to hear it. Tell me what you did, or what you wish you'd done. Was justice served or did the paperwork win? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me where you stand on community versus control. And if you want, share the time you stood your ground or didn't, and what you learned. If nothing else, let's keep each other honest about what counts as authority and what counts as a good neighbor.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.